I let my sister-in-law store some boxes in our basement. For months passed, and suddenly I was told not to enter. It's their area now, my wife shrugged. That evening, I discovered a lock on my door. I grabbed my toolkit, took a deep breath, and by night, everything they owned was on the lawn. I, 34M, never thought a simple favor would turn my life upside down. My wife's younger sister had always been the dramatic type, but when she showed up at our door 4 months ago with tears streaming down her face, I couldn't turn her away. She explained through sobs that her landlord was selling the building and she needed somewhere to store her belongings while she found a new place. Just temporarily, she promised. A few boxes in our basement, nothing more. My wife immediately agreed, shooting me that look that meant any objection would earn me a week on the couch. The basement had always been my sanctuary. I'd spent 3 years converting it into a workshop where I could tinker with electronics and work on small projects. It was my escape from the chaos upstairs, especially when my sister-in-law visited with her endless complaints about life. Initially, it seemed harmless enough. She brought over maybe 10 boxes and stacked them neatly in one corner. I even helped carry them down, being the accommodating brother-in-law I thought I was supposed to be. She thanked me profusely and promised it would only be for a couple of weeks. Those weeks stretched into a month. Then 2. Every time I mentioned it to my wife, she'd dismiss my concerns with a wave of her hand. Family helps family, she'd remind me. Her sister was going through a tough time and needed our support. Month 3 brought more boxes. Furniture appeared next. A couch, a dresser, kitchen appliances. My workshop space shrank to a narrow pathway between towering stacks of her possessions. When I complained, my wife accused me of being selfish and unsympathetic to her sister's struggles. By month 4, I could barely access my workbench. The basement looked like a storage unit, not the organized workshop I'd worked so hard to create. Every surface was covered with her belongings, and the smell of must and old fabric had replaced the familiar scent of sawdust and metal polish. Then came the day that changed everything. I was heading downstairs to retrieve my drill when my wife intercepted me at the basement door. She told me I shouldn't go down there anymore. Her sister was using it as her space now, she explained, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. This was my house, my basement, my workshop. How could I suddenly be banned from entering? My wife just shrugged and told me her sister needed privacy while she sorted through her things. It was temporary, she insisted, though her tone suggested otherwise. The audacity hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent years transforming that basement, invested hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars in equipment and improvements. Now I was being treated like a stranger in my own home, denied access to the space I'd created with my own hands. I tried reasoning with my wife, explaining how unfair this was. She accused me of being unreasonable and reminded me that family comes first. When I pointed out that I was her family too, she rolled her eyes and walked away, ending the conversation with her typical dismissive attitude. That evening, I discovered just how serious they were about keeping me out. A shiny new deadbolt had been installed on the basement door, and I didn't have a key. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I was being locked out of my own space by people living in my own house. Standing there, staring at that lock, something inside me snapped. This wasn't about helping family anymore. This was about respect, boundaries, and the fact that I'd become a pushover in my own home. The basement represented more than just storage space. It was the erosion of everything I'd worked to build. I went upstairs and calmly asked my wife for the key. She told me her sister had it, and that I needed to respect their boundaries. When I explained that this was still my house and my basement, she accused me of being controlling and unsupportive. The conversation escalated quickly, with her defending her sister's right to privacy while completely dismissing my rights as a homeowner. That night, I lay in bed planning my next move. I could hear them downstairs, laughing and talking late into the evening in what used to be my space. The sound echoed through the house like a constant reminder of how they'd taken over my territory. By morning, my decision was made. If they wanted to play games with locks and boundaries, I could play too. I waited until they both left for the day, my wife to work and her sister to whatever she did during her endless job search that never seemed to produce results. I went to my garage and retrieved my toolkit. The deadbolt was good quality, but I knew exactly how to remove it. Years of home improvement had taught me that every security measure was only as strong as the person trying to defeat it. 20 minutes later, the door swung open freely. What I found inside made my blood boil. This wasn't temporary storage anymore. They'd created a living space. A mattress was set up in one corner with proper bedding. My workbench had been converted into a makeshift kitchen area with a hot plate, microwave, and mini fridge. Extension cords snaked across the floor, tapping into my electrical outlets to power various appliances. They'd essentially moved her into my basement without asking, turning my workshop into an unauthorized apartment. The disrespect was staggering. Not only had they taken over my space, but they'd lied about it, hidden it, and locked me out to prevent me from discovering their deception. I stood there for several minutes, processing the violation. This went far beyond helping family in need. They'd conspired to steal my space and turn me into an unwitting landlord providing free housing. The sister-in-law wasn't looking for her own place. She'd found it right here in my basement. The betrayal cut deep, but the anger burned deeper. My wife had chosen her sister over me, had actively participated in deceiving me about what was happening in my own home. She'd looked me in the eye and lied repeatedly about the temporary nature of this arrangement. I made my decision quickly. If they could make unilateral decisions about my property, then so could I. I spent the next 6 hours methodically removing everything that belonged to the sister-in-law. Every box, every piece of furniture, every personal item went out to the front lawn. I was careful not to damage anything, but I wasn't gentle about it either. The couch landed with a satisfying thud on the grass. The boxes stacked up like a small mountain. My neighbors began to notice the growing pile, but I didn't care. Let them wonder. Let them see exactly what happened when someone took advantage of generosity and crossed every reasonable boundary. The mattress was awkward to maneuver up the narrow basement stairs, but determination gave me strength. I dragged it outside and deposited it next to the growing collection of belongings. Each item represented another violation of trust, another lie I'd been told. By late afternoon, the basement was clear. My workshop was visible again, though it would need serious cleaning and reorganization. The hot plate and microwave went outside too. They could take their unauthorized kitchen elsewhere. I reinstalled the original door handle, making sure the lock worked properly for my key only. Then I sat in my reclaimed space and waited for them to come home. My wife arrived first. I heard her car in the driveway, then her shocked voice outside as she discovered the mountain of belongings on our front lawn. She burst through the front door, calling my name with an edge of panic in her voice. She found me in the living room, calmly watching television. Her face was flushed with anger and disbelief as she demanded to know what I thought I was doing. I explained that I was reclaiming my property and that her sister's free ride was over. The argument that followed was explosive. She accused me of being cruel and heartless, throwing a vulnerable person out on the street. I countered by pointing out that I'd never agreed to provide free housing, only temporary storage, and that they'd lied and deceived me about the true nature of the arrangement. When her sister arrived and saw her belongings scattered across the lawn, the dramatics reached new heights. She wailed about having nowhere to go, about being homeless and desperate. I reminded her that she'd had 4 months to find alternative arrangements and had instead chosen to secretly move into my basement without permission. My wife demanded I help move everything back inside. I refused. I told them both that the sister-in-law was no longer welcome in my home and that she had until morning to collect her belongings before I considered them abandoned property. The accusations flew fast and furious. I was selfish, cruel, heartless, controlling. How could I throw family out on the street? Where was my compassion, my sense of loyalty? I let them vent their anger while remaining calm. When they finished, I explained my perspective clearly. This had never been about helping family. It had become about 2 people conspiring to steal my space, lie to me repeatedly, and treat me like a stranger in my own home. The sister-in-law wasn't homeless. She'd chosen to freeload instead of finding legitimate housing. The sister-in-law tried a different approach, switching to tears and pleading. She claimed she'd been looking for apartments, but couldn't find anything affordable. I suggested she expand her search radius or consider roommates, like millions of other people in her situation managed to do. My wife accused me of destroying our marriage over a basement. I corrected her. She damaged our marriage by choosing her sister over me, by lying and deceiving me, and by showing complete disrespect for my property and my feelings. The basement was just the visible symbol of much deeper problems. As darkness fell, neighbors began to notice the ongoing drama. Cars slowed as they passed, and I could see people peering through windows at the spectacle on our front lawn. The sister-in-law became increasingly frantic about her belongings being visible to everyone. I suggested she start loading her car if she was concerned about privacy. She didn't have enough vehicle space for everything, which led to more tears and accusations. I remained unmoved. Her poor planning wasn't my emergency. Eventually, she began making phone calls, seeking friends or relatives who might help with temporary storage or housing. It was fascinating to watch her suddenly develop the resourcefulness that had been absent during 4 months of freeloading. My wife tried one last emotional appeal, begging me to let her sister stay just 1 more week to find proper accommodations. I declined. Trust, once broken, couldn't be easily repaired. They'd proven they couldn't be honest about boundaries and agreements. Update 1. The sister-in-law managed to arrange temporary housing with a friend across town. It took 3 trips with a borrowed truck to move all her belongings, a process that lasted until nearly midnight. Throughout it all, she maintained that I was the villain in this situation, that I'd ruined her life over a misunderstanding. My wife barely spoke to me during the moving process, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in. Her sister hadn't been temporarily storing belongings. She'd been living rent-free in our basement while lying about her living situation. Once the lawn was clear and the house quiet, my wife and I had a long, overdue conversation. She admitted that she'd known her sister was essentially living in the basement, but hadn't known how to address it without causing family drama. She'd hoped the situation would resolve itself naturally. I explained that the deception and disrespect had damaged our relationship more than any honest conversation about boundaries ever could have. By excluding me from decisions about my own home and lying about what was happening, she'd chosen her sister's comfort over our marriage. The conversation was difficult but necessary. We established new rules about future house guests and agreed that any arrangement lasting more than 2 weeks required explicit agreement from both of us. More importantly, we agreed that family relationships shouldn't override spousal respect and honesty. Update 2. 3 weeks later, I discovered the full extent of the basement situation. While cleaning and reorganizing my workshop, I found evidence that the sister-in-law had been living there for at least 2 months, possibly longer. Food wrappers, personal hygiene items, and other signs of permanent occupancy had been hidden behind boxes. I also found several pieces of my equipment had been damaged or moved without permission. My expensive router table had water damage from the makeshift kitchen setup, and several hand tools were missing entirely. When I mentioned this to my wife, she seemed genuinely shocked by the extent of her sister's presumption. The financial impact became clear when our next electric bill arrived. Our usage had increased significantly during the months of unauthorized basement living. I calculated that we'd essentially provided free housing, utilities, and workshop access worth several $1,000s. My wife agreed to contact her sister about compensation for the damaged equipment and increased utility costs. The response was predictable: denial, excuses, and claims of poverty. According to her sister, she'd barely used any electricity and couldn't possibly have damaged anything. This final act of dishonesty seemed to open my wife's eyes to her sister's character. She began remembering other instances of manipulation and boundary crossing that she'd previously excused as family loyalty or difficult circumstances. Update 3. 2 months after the lawn incident, my wife's sister attempted to reconcile. She showed up unannounced while my wife was at work, hoping to speak with me privately. She apologized for the misunderstanding and asked if we could start fresh. I listened politely but declined her olive branch. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt with a simple apology, especially when the apology focused on misunderstandings rather than acknowledging deliberate deception and boundary violations. She then revealed her true purpose for the visit. Her current living arrangement was temporary, and she was hoping to work out a proper rental agreement for the basement. She'd be willing to pay reasonable rent and respect my workshop area. The audacity was breathtaking. After being forcibly removed for unauthorized occupancy, she was now proposing to become an official tenant in the same space she'd already stolen. I explained that some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt. My wife supported my decision when I told her about the visit. She'd come to realize that her sister's problems weren't temporary setbacks, but ongoing patterns of manipulation and poor decision-making. Enabling this behavior hadn't helped anyone. Our marriage recovered stronger than before. The crisis had forced us to address underlying communication issues and establish clearer boundaries around family relationships. We both learned valuable lessons about the importance of spousal unity and honest communication. The basement returned to its original purpose as my workshop. I installed a proper lock and security system, not because I expected another invasion, but because the experience had taught me the value of protecting what I'd worked to build. Sometimes I still think about that evening when I discovered the unauthorized apartment in my basement. The anger has faded, replaced by a sense of satisfaction that I stood up for myself and my boundaries. The sister-in-law's belongings on the lawn became a symbol of reclaimed respect and the end of my days as an unwilling doormat. Family relationships are important, but they shouldn't come at the cost of self-respect and honesty. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for everyone involved is to enforce consequences for unacceptable behavior. My marriage is stronger, my boundaries are clearer, and my workshop is exactly where it belongs, under my control in my own home.